Good morning, students. It is week 2, and this is the introductory video in which we'll be going through some of the content for the week. I am on the page for week 2, the overview page. You can get here by going to the home page and then just going down to week 2. As I talked about in the first video, this is the main place that you as a student should be clicking on for every week. It will give you a rundown of what we're going to be trying to accomplish that week. This week has the lofty title of Rhetoric and Science, and there's, this portrait of Plato and Aristotle debating with one another. Not that we're quite getting into ancient Greek that much, but we're going to be looking at some of the rhetorical concerns of science, specifically with this reading from Carolyn Miller. Let's kind of like go through the content for the week. So the Carolyn Miller reading, it is a reading and response. Like a lot of these mini responses, I'm not saying it needs to be super, super long. I am asking you to actually engage with the text. With this particular one, as much as anything, it's meant to, I don't know, get students thinking about the social nature of science. I've had compliments on this reading from past students who I thought were very thoughtful students. They've said it was like an interesting piece. I think it is too. It does come from my particular field, rhetoric and communication, and because of that, it can be a slightly daunting read, meaning it's using a lot of specialized jargon that is maybe not familiar to a lot of hard science students. It is a peer-reviewed article, and we're going to be looking at 2 peer-reviewed articles this week. One is the Carolyn Miller, and to be honest, I want a perspective on this. I don't mean to overplay it as like a hugely important assignment. I would say that these 3 readings from Nicholas Carr, Atul Gawande, and Alex Haynes matter quite a bit more. And we're actually going to have some assignments with these this week. So the Carolyn Miller, if I'm looking at my calendar, that response is due by Tuesday at midnight. That's just a small little reading to give some perspective on how I view communication within the sciences. Sometime, and I know it's a lot to read, so we're gonna maybe leave it till Wednesday, but sometime by the end of Wednesday, I would like to see you post to this discussion. The discussion is asking you to talk about these other texts that are on the weekly schedule, particularly the one from Atul Gawande and the one from Alex Haynes et al. Let me go back and kind of like point out that there's these 3 readings here: Nicholas Carr, Atul Gawande, Alex Haynes, and then I'm asking you to participate in a discussion about the popular press and the academic press. That is the main goal for this week, and it is one that we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on. It's a discussion. People should be posting and then reading one another's comments and then responding to them. This discussion this week is going to be focused on setting some ground rules for the type of writing that we are doing. You're reading these 2 texts. I believe I've got them on screen over here. Let's bring it into the Zoom window so we can see it. So one of these is a peer-reviewed article from the New England Journal of Medicine, this like highly prestigious medical journal. This is one from Alex Haynes and all of these other people. It is worth noting that Atul Gawande is also a guest author on this article. When we say et al, Haynes et al, I've used that abbreviation in many different places. That means just and the other authors. I am asking in the discussion this week for people to compare this medical journal article with this chapter from a book called The Checklist Manifesto. Atul Gawande is a working surgeon. He's written several different books, and he writes in a much more popular style. And the main goal with this discussion this week is to parse out some of the key differences between the popular press and the academic press, or the peer-reviewed publishing world, in other words. And we're going to be kind of like splitting our loyalties between both this semester. I will say that most of what we do early in the semester is going to be much more formal, much more academic in nature. When we get to the second half of the semester, in which we engage in a research project, then I'd say you can write the type of paper that seems best to you. We'll talk about that more when the time comes. But the goal with this week is to parse out some of the differences between the popular press, again, and the academic press. Gawande, he wrote a book. Sorry, I don't mean to look at that. The book is called The Checklist Manifesto. It's got a catchy title. It's trying to like get your attention. It's meant to, spark people's interest and be intriguing. And people will like see that title and pick it up, and then they'll enter a story, a story that's like, fairly, I don't know if entertaining is quite the right word, but intriguing. We've got the story about the B-17 bomber, or the predecessor to the B-17 bomber, crashing into the ground in a big fireball. That's Atul Gawande trying to catch your attention. He wants to have like the super catchy title, and then like he tells a story at the beginning of the chapter. This is actually chapter two. The first chapter starts in a very similar way, and it's a feature of popular writing to start off with like a story, to say like here's a narrative, here's something that happened, and to hopefully hook the reader or intrigue the reader with that story. So I would compare that with this one, surgical safety checklist to reduce morbidity and mortality in a global population. That is obviously not so catchy. It is much more straight up informative. And in the beginning of this article, once we get past the abstract, understand there is definitely an active strategy going on in this opening paragraph, but it's not the like attention getter. It's not like the story time that Gawande participates in. The assumption is that somebody reading an article in New England Journal of Medicine will be reading it because they're interested in it, and there's no need to catch the reader's attention. It's also notable that this sort of writing is not trying to sell itself in the same way that, say, a popular piece of writing is. You know, Atul Gawande wants to sell books. His publisher wants him to sell books. That's why they have the title that they have. That's part of why the style is the way that it is. This one is a much drier article. I don't know if it's terribly hard. It seems like, you know, for the most part, a fairly straightforward article to read, but it's not trying to be catchy. It's not trying to be like super entertaining. It's just trying to be, well, more than anything, informative. The exercise that I just kind of went through verbally, where I'm talking about the difference in titles and also the difference in opening strategy. I should say I didn't quite talk about the opening strategy here, so just very quickly, they set up this classic way of beginning an academic paper where they say, here's something that's important, here's a problem, we have a solution, or at least part of the solution. In this case, the thing that's important is surgical care. It happens all over the world. The problem is that there are complications and death that derive from surgical care. The solution, or at least the partial solution they have, is to provide this checklist, and they're providing the study on the effectiveness of a checklist. Your goal as a student in the discussion this week is to look at these two texts and to compare them to one another, and to try to draw, based on these two texts, conclusions about the popular press versus the academic press, the differences between them, where they might align and where they are notably different. And again, most of what we're doing in this class, especially in the first half of the semester, is much more the academic press. We'll get to like more popular sources later. In some way, you can see this discussion is like setting some ground rules for like the style you should adopt when you're writing for formal audiences, like what you can get away with and what you can't. Let me shift gears a little bit and get into the discussion itself. So I've got some questions here. I would say please don't go through and answer every single one of them. Instead, pick one or two and try to delve into them and give your answer to them. And please, folks, let's try to make sure we're basing this discussion on the text that I'm asking you to read. I did feel like this was a bit of a problem with last week's discussion. I made some notes about it. I think I said some things in the discussion about it. So just very quickly, when I'm posing a discussion, like say last week, I said, read this chapter from this textbook, I'm asking y'all to kind of make some sort of reference to the textbook. I read a few responses that were talking about like, you know, making generic comments about, say, peer review or paradigms. And in some cases, those comments were clearly informed by the chapter that we read. And the main point with that, you know, discussion last week when it comes to peer review is that it performs sort of like a gatekeeping function of keeping out like the pseudoscience or the like incorrect science. And people that posted something to that effect, I was stoked on that. I mean, I gave the textbook in order to like, you know, have people read it and make a certain point. And if you're posting to the discussion without referencing the textbook and what it says at all, I would say that's a bit of a problem. The goal is to not come up with like, you know, the Wikipedia version of what it says about peer review, or the ChatGPT version of like peer review is both good and bad. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking you to read the text that is assigned on Canvas, and then to make your responses within the context of that text. So for this discussion, the goal here is to write about the differences between the popular press, like, you know, on sale at Barnes & Noble, and the academic press, these peer-reviewed journals that professionals write for one another and that have a very, very niche audience. I'm asking you to come up with differences between these different things, but I'm also asking to make sure that people are putting those differences in terms of these two readings that we're doing, the two readings things being Gawande and Haynes et al. Anyhow, I'll leave that alone. There's other stuff to talk about. Let's just be clear that there is a discussion taking place this week. Your post should come in, I would hope by Wednesday evening. I'm seeing something that's posted, and then let's make sure that we go back and respond to one another throughout the week. So that's the major goal this week. Post to this discussion. Let's set some ground rules about the popular press versus the academic press. Goal number two is to figure out what you want to do for the SOP project. I talked about this briefly in the previous video. I will talk about it again right now. Let's just kind of look at some of the stuff we have here. Read the introduction to the SOP project. You probably did it last week, but if not, read it now. Really spend some time on this thing, read through, make sure you understand what it's asking you to do. And then let's also be aware that by the end of the week, there is a quiz on the SOP project. And now if I open up this introduction, let's just kind of go through it really quickly. The SOP project will carry us through the first half of the semester. SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure. The SOP project needs to be centered around some set of instructions. That's what a standard operating procedure needs to be centered around some set of instructions. That's what a standard operating procedure is. It says, here's the right way to do this thing. You don't necessarily have to write a traditional lab-based SOP for this assignment. Any sort of instructions for any sort of activity that is standardizable, that will suffice to fulfill the assignment. It doesn't have to involve scientific work. I've had students write about bicycle repair. I've had students write about using certain types of software, like say video editing software. I've had students write about doing some job-related task, like setting up a bar or checking in patients or conducting inventory. Any of those can work for this assignment. As long as it's a set of instructions that you can have people do, then it will work. I've had students write about athletic-related SOPs. Students have written about how to run like a youth basketball camp or a training regimen for athletes, participating in a certain sport. There needs to be like a clear set of boundaries and a clear goal. But as long as it's, you can write about sports, you can write about hobbies, you can write about like things that you enjoy doing or expertise that you have or the activities at your job. I'm okay with any of those. And there's a wide open category of things that will work for this assignment. Restrictions. One restriction is it needs to be something you can actually do and that you can have other people do. That's important because of one of the assignments that's involved in this project. So let's make sure that's the case. Make sure it's going to be something that's not going to cost tons and tons of money, and make sure it has a clear set of boundaries. So let's talk through the assignments. There are 3 in the SOP project. These are all major assignments. To be clear, every one of these is worth 100 points. They will count significantly on your grade. Assignment number 1 is a project proposal. This is the one we're going to start talking about a lot next week. I am absolutely insistent that the proposal you write is to a real existing audience. I'm also strongly encouraging students to think local. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you want to write on bicycle repair. I'm not asking you to write a proposal to anybody who's interested in bicycles. I'm not asking you to write like a guide to bicycle repair for just people that like bikes. Instead, I would ask you to target a specific business or entity here within the Valley, proposing to them that you can write a set of instructions that will help their clients or possibly help their employees. So if you want to write about bicycle maintenance, I would say a great candidate for an audience for that sort of proposal would be the Salt Lake City Bicycle Collective, this nonprofit agency that tries to restore bicycles for people that need them. Or you could write to a local shop, like say Saturday Cycles, one of my favorite shops here in Salt Lake City. That would be like a viable audience for you to target with this proposal. If you want to write about something that's cooking related, don't just write it to people who like food. Instead, I'd say write it to a cooking class institution here in the Valley. If you're writing something lab related, I want you to write it to a specific professor, somebody who exists, somebody with like an email address here at the University of Utah. I've had students write tutoring guides for classes that they've taken in the past. I've had students write about like how to perform certain activities that are expected in class. And if you're doing something like that, I would ask you to write it to a specific professor, somebody who actually exists. This matters a lot. The proposal's, 2 pages, single spaced. It's not a very long document. It's meant to be packed with meaning and rhetorical activities, and some of that gets so much easier and so much better if you've got a real tangible audience on the receiving end. So I'm absolutely insistent about this. There is a memo due for the SOP project. This is where you kind of declare, here's what I want to do for this project. Here's what I'm trying to address with it. Let's make darn sure that you've got a audience figured out for this. Like that's one of the things I'm going to be like specifically looking for. There's got to be some sort of like clear designated target that you're trying to approach with the proposal. So anyway, let me get back to the introduction. That's assignment number 1, project proposal, where you essentially like pitch the idea. To be clear, first assignment is meant to inform us about the world of scientific funding and grant proposals and how scientists get money for their activities. It also has some, I don't know, some resonance with like job related proposals. Like proposals take place in the working world quite a bit. So anyway, it's meant to fulfill those 2 goals. The second assignment is a standard operating procedure itself. I'm using this term very loosely. It can be a set of instructions of any sort, as long as it's, somewhat standardizable. So some students write a traditional SOP, some will write more of like a field guide or like an instructional article that might appear in like a hobbyist magazine. I've had students do videos, like instructional videos for this assignment. They've worked out good. Most of them have anyway. I think any of those are fine. Like when I say SOP, just recognize it's this really broad category that essentially means instructions, like you're guiding somebody on how to do something. So the first assignment that's going to be due, the first one you're going to hand in is a proposal. And while I am reading through and responding to the proposals, I'm going to ask you to fairly quickly turn around and write an SOP, and then you're going to have somebody use the SOP. This is where assignment 3 comes into play. Assignment 3 is a report on usability, and I'm asking you to have someone follow the instructions that you wrote, assess whether or not the instructions work as intended or whether or not there's some problems with them, and then to write a report about that experience of usability testing. A lot of CS majors in the class, if you're looking at a career in software design, you should get to know usability testing. It's like this huge industry, like within the software development world. And not just that, I mean, there's a lot of businesses that take advantage of it. It's essentially the process of assessing how users react with the software or the instructions in this case that they're using. So that's the SLP project that will be carrying us through the first half of the semester. If I'm sitting here talking about it for a few minutes, let's just understand that's not a substitute for actually reading this description. You should go through and read it. There are examples. Is a long list of things that students have chosen in the past that have worked out well. And if you are drawing a blank on what to do for this assignment, that's a reason to send me a Canvas message. I'll try to get back with you and try to help you brainstorm out some possibilities for this. Or you can always stop by office hours. So anyway, this is the assignment the series of assignments that's going to keep us going through the first half of the semester. Thing I'm reading is Introduction to the SLP project. Make sure you have a handle on that. Let's wrap this video up just by kind of clarifying the goals for this week. Very quick reading response on Carolyn Miller. She's an academic working in my own field. I like her perspective. I think it's interesting. Give me your response to that. Not meant to be a big deal. I'd say it's a bigger deal to participate in the discussion in which we discuss these 2 things. And again, let's make sure that we're couching our responses in terms of the readings that I've asked you to do. Please don't plug into ChatGPT. What's the difference between the popular press and the academic press? I can't deal with that. I need you to be human. I need you to like kind of to make explicit references to these 2 texts that we're looking at here. Oh, the other thing I should do is I should quickly, if I go to the discussion, let's also note that there's this list. Pick 1 or 2 items from the list and discuss the difference between them. That list looks like this. I'm asking you to consider, like I did, the difference between titles and what that says about them, or the difference between typography and format, their opening strategy, whether or not they use sarcasm, whether or not they use questions, whether or not they use topic sentences, or how often they use topic sentences, and so forth. So I'm asking you in the discussion, pick 1 or 2 of these characteristics and try to write about whether or not you think Atul Gawande are utilized and Alex Haynes are using those techniques or not. And then also be thinking about the SOP project. There's a quiz on it by the end of the week, and also there's that memo coming up. I should say that if you already you've read through the SOP project description and you feel like you know what you want to do for this upcoming project, you can write the memo now. We can try to get a head start on things. You can, log into that memo assignment, send that today. And I will respond to it. And I should say these projects are subject to instructor approval. I almost always say yes, but sometimes I'll say, yes, but we need to think about such and such. So if you want to get that out of the way soon and you know what you want to write about, that's great. You can, put the memo in today. In any case, as always, you should get hold of me if you have questions. I also always have those office hours on Mondays and Wednesday mornings. You can stop by there if you have questions about anything. I actually did have some students stop by last week. I was happy. Students stop by and, ask questions, and I answered them. That's how it's meant to work. Anyhow, folks, I'll cut this video off. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you have questions about anything, and have a good week.